So hi everyone, as I said, my name's Andrew Woodward, and I'm here today to talk to you about being yourself unlimited. And it's all about you and what you can do in your life. And I want to share you some of the experiences and stories that I've had in my life where it's been unlimited to a certain degree, but I've still got a long way to go. And as far as I'm concerned, at the ripe old age of 47, I still consider that the best years of my life lay ahead of me. And the place where you can have an unlimited life is here on earth. And to have that, you need to travel, in my opinion. And it's not about traveling in terms of holidays or work trips or studying overseas. I mean, that's all great if you can do that, but it's just traveling mentally and ensuring that you think globally when you're approaching anything in life. And as I said, while it is great to travel for holidays, for work, or live overseas, or study overseas, you can do it from here in Australia. You can do it via books, podcasts, cooking courses, music, social media. There are just so many opportunities to have the world in your house now, or the world in your suburb. As far as I'm concerned, the more global you are, the better person you are, the better life you will have, and the greater contribution you can give back to society. And as I said, today is my story, and I want to just touch on some of the high points throughout that life that I've had so that you can see what might apply to you. But the first step is to get on that runway, and you've got to get on the runway, as I said, be it mentally or physically, to go overseas. I never travelled until I was 18 years old. 19 years old. That was my first overseas trip. My travel initially came via something called shortwave radio. Back in the 70s and 80s, you don't see many of these dial or radios now, or some of the old digital radios. But as a kid, I was given a shortwave radio to communicate with the rest of the world. And I grew up in a household where World War II left a lot of emotional scars in my family. I had grandparents who dominated our family, and they were heavily involved in World War II. They never travelled. We didn't eat, Asian food. We didn't eat pasta or spaghetti because that was from overseas. I lived in a very Australian household in the 60s and 70s as I grew up. And then I was given this shortwave radio that enabled me to tune into places like Radio Japan, Radio Netherlands, Radio Tanzania, Radio Free Europe in the days of the Cold War. And then I used to hear all these funny voices and funny opinions and funny views coming through this little transistor radio like the National Panasonic one you see up here. And I was able to learn about the rest of the world. And that's how my fascination began with the world. Then I started writing to these radio stations and collecting what's called QSL cards. And that became a hobby, whereas I wrote to 100 countries around the world and got postcards back from them. That's the sort of thing we did before the days of iPhones and iPads and things like that. And the interesting thing about it is it's communications, it's technology, and it's the world. And it's what I do today, except today I actually get paid for it. The other realisation I've had is that we in Australia, we live at the bottom of the world. And I also realise that we're a long way from anywhere. And a couple of years ago, I got the big global job in the United States of America at my company's head office. I had global responsibility for a job. I was 39 or 40 years old, about 43, when I moved to the United States with my then wife and children. And, I went there for the big job. It was intimidating. Here I was from this little country at the bottom of the earth, and I was, in a worldwide job doing a fairly major role. And as I said, it can be quite intimidating. But what I did learn through that experience was that I'm as good as them. I'm as good as the Americans who are in these jobs in the United States, or the English who are in these jobs in London, or the Germans who are in these jobs in Germany. The only reason that those people are in those jobs in the United States is because the head office is there in the United States. If you go for the job in Australia, we're usually a branch office or a regional office, whereas the USA or England or Germany or wherever, they have all the head office jobs. So the thing was that just because I was from Australia or South Africa or New Zealand or Brazil, it didn't matter. I had exactly the same skill set as these people who had these big global jobs. And that was the one thing that I really learned about. And the other thing I learned is that there are an amazing number of Australians overseas who are doing incredible jobs. When I was living in San Francisco, I became friends with an Aussie lady who was one of the big wigs at Yahoo. She was previously Hillary Clinton's press secretary when Hillary was running for the presidency. We also had the head of business lecturing at Stanford, one of the great unis of the world. He was an Aussie. The head of Levi Strauss, the people who make the jeans, he was an Aussie. And then I met this amazing kid from Sydney's West. He is an adventurer, and he takes executives who are on tens of millions of dollars a year on treks through the Arctic wilderness to toughen them up, and he gets paid for it. I mean, there are just some amazing Australians doing amazing jobs. There are 1 million Australians overseas at the moment. In California, there were 60,000 Australians. In San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley, there were 17,000 Australians. So there are some great people out there doing some really good things. I want to talk about globalization. To many, globalization is a dirty word in that to some it has resulted in a loss of industries, it has resulted in a loss of individuality in some countries and some communities. I mean, the French government's trying desperately to keep the French language alive in the age of the internet. But I see globalization for individuals as a massive positive. And I think the sort of person who can consider themselves globalized is someone who's always looking over the horizon, looking at what's going on in the rest of the world rather than just here, someone who thinks big, someone who genuinely cares about what others think, someone who integrates rather than imposes their will on ways, and Americans are very good at that, imposing their way on others rather than integrating, someone who makes an effort, someone who is open to new ideas, someone who reads, listens, or watches. I mean, for example, each week I personally listen to about 12 hours of podcasts, from the Wall Street Journal, the BBC, National Public Radio in the United States. I mean, there are just so many ways to get quality information into your life these days. I've been lucky in my life, but I've made my luck in that I've been able to realise my fascination with the outside world into my workplace. And I've had some awesome jobs over the years. I'm going to talk about some of those, not to be boastful, but to just kind of demonstrate the sort of things that you can do. I mean, one of my best jobs was I had several engagements with the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, what up until that stage was considered to be the best Olympic Games ever. I was also involved in Rugby World Cup 2003, which was a fantastic tournament, except for one game and one kick by a particular Englishman called Johnny Wilkinson. I also worked for the Australian Tourist Commission, where I used to turn up for work each day and promote Australia as the best holiday destination in the world. I mean, what better job can you get than that? I had the honour to work for the government of Indonesia after the first terrorist attack on Bali to help rebuild their tourism image. Then a few years later, I helped the government of Papua New Guinea develop their first tourism image or tourism brand for their country. And when I worked in the United States, I got to work on sponsorship of the Olympics, FIFA World Cup, and National Football League American football. So they're just some of the amazing things that you can do in your life. So I've been able to take my personal fascination with the world and do it personally, but professionally as well, and even better, get paid for it. And today, I get to exercise my fascination with the world right here back in Australia in this amazing place called the Gold Coast, where in 2018 we will host the Commonwealth Games. And it's an absolute privilege every day to turn up to work, to be a part of a team that will put on one of the world's great sporting events here on the Gold Coast. And I think that's the crux of what I want to get through to everyone today, is that over the years through working in international events, I've captured a lot of knowledge and a lot of ideas and a lot of contacts and met a lot of people. And I was living in the United States when this job at the Gold Coast came up. I saw it come up and I thought, that's me. I'm coming home for that job. And that's, the reality of it is, to take what you've learned and bring it back and put it to use for your own good, for the good of your city, the good of your state, and also the good of your country. It can be tough going overseas. I don't want to make, give the impression that it's all roses while you're away. There are some downsides. You do go through culture shock. For example, in the United States, you cannot buy a meat pie or sausage roll to save your life. And that's a really serious issue as far as I'm concerned. You can go through periods of loneliness. There can be conflict in the workplace. It can be expensive. Like when I left, I just left my toaster, kettle, television, everything behind because they didn't work in this country. It can be inefficient and it can have great strains on relationships. That said, there are some great Australian instrumentalities around the world that can help you out. There are collectives of Australians. You can find them in social media. You can find them on meetup.com, and you can find them just by searching the web in whatever city you go to. And the Australian Chambers of Commerce, I've got ones up there from the UK, United States, South China, and Vietnam. They're Australian groups who can introduce Australians to other business and social opportunities in those places, and they're a tremendous resource for any Australian who is heading overseas. And one of the great things that I learned from my overseas travel was just how bloody good Australia is. I mean, we sit here, we all get very boo-hoo when you're stuck in a traffic jam for 15 minutes here. Can I just say, when I look at Australia, we are just in such a good position here. We have a great democracy, we have a great parliament, we have a great tax system, we have a great healthcare system, we have great environmental protection. And our education standards are amongst the best in the world. In all those rankings, we're usually top 5 or top 10. And I can tell you now, not all of those countries have that, and we are the envy of the world. In a cultural sense, you turn the radio on in San Francisco, K-Fog, you will hear one Australian artist every 2 hours or thereabouts, be they today's artist, Missy Higgins, or going back to someone like INXS. I mean, Australia is just in such a good position internationally and back here at home. And also too, if you are going to travel internationally, Australia is a great place to do it from and work internationally. We have a great education system here, we have a great work ethic, Australians work hard, and we have a great culture. We speak English, our nation has a good name, and Australia is present around the world. There are a lot of Australian companies out there in the world at this time. So there is no holding you back when it comes to going overseas. As for the future, I just kind of have 4 observations that maybe for you to take into account if you are thinking about being a global citizen. And these are just things that I've picked up in some of my reading and listening and contemplating about things on my morning walk. First of all, we hear about the internet revolution. I think, for me personally, I think that the next revolution that I see is going to be in personal mobility, and that is in the ability of people just to go and work in England or the United States, or people to come here or there. I think, borders, they're just lines on maps. States are lines on maps. I think we're going to see a lot more mobility of people and workforces in the years ahead. We hear a lot about BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India and China. Yes, they are countries of the future. The Australian government's just done a paper on the Asian century, which identifies a lot of Australian opportunities in Asia in the years to come. We're hearing about Brazil and the emergence of Latin America. I urge you to also keep an eye on Africa. They're probably where parts of Asia were about 20 or 30 years ago. So for people in this audience, Africa could be a very, very wealthy continent when you start getting out there and going around the world. The internet revolution, I have absolutely no idea where that's going, nor does anyone else. All I do know is that whatever is happening today and whatever you think about the internet today and what it can provide will be vastly different to what it's going to be in 5, 10, 15 years' time. So don't keep your views about what the capability is of the internet from today. Make sure your mind moves along and changes with the time. And the final point I want to make is about things are getting cheaper. I checked last night online, you can fly to London for $1,500 return. A couple of years ago, that was $5 grand. A few years ago, a laptop computer cost you $3 grand. Today, it costs $1 grand. It is just getting so much cheaper to do things. So, again, keep up with the figures. Don't think, oh, gee, that's costly. Well, actually, no, it's getting a whole lot cheaper now to go and do those things. So in conclusion, the world is awaiting your call, and that's the truth. And it is a fascinating place out there. I'm not being boastful about my travels or anything like that. I've still got a lot more travel to do in my life. As I said, when my assignment is done here, I'll probably head back overseas because it is a fascinating place out there. And then I'll bring that knowledge back to Australia and again, work on something else. And I always ask myself, are there any limits or anything like that? The answer is no, because it's all about yourself and it's about being yourself unlimited. Thank you.